This process is demonstrated by mounting the jig on a lathe bed and using the lathe headstock and tailstock to hold the leg. The index used here does not use the lathe index at all. It is a shop-made index, and I use it because it is more flexible and easier to use than the lathe index. This jig could easily be set up to work on a bench-mounted holder, similar to the one used to demonstrate rounding the reeds later on in this video.
So let's talk about how to set up a leg in this jig to get it started for reading. In a federal type leg, it is customary to have the first reed centered on the face of the leg. Now, the scratch stock will follow these index slots. So in order to set up the leg, you need to devise a mechanism to cause the center of the face of the leg to come up in between two index slots. So this particular indexing wheel, when I cut the slots for the indices, I picked one of the pairs of slots and put a dividing line in between those. So these are cut with these are a saw curve, and this is simply a pencil line. And this leg gets mounted in this index wheel such that the face of the leg is centered on the line that's between the two index points. These pieces of plywood have been screwed on here to cause these four legs that I'll be reading to line up automatically. So a few minutes was spent getting this correct, but once it's done for the first leg, it's done completely. So to set up this, to make the first cut, you mount the leg with the face, the front face aligned with the center indexing line, and put the index stop into the steady rest, into the rest. Now you take a square and you turn this leg until it is dead square to the bottom. So that means, the face of the leg is dead square to the bottom, so that this, I know if I align this slot, this stop with that line, when I turn it and lock it in place to do my first read, it will cause that read to be centered on the face of the leg. This is particularly important if you have an odd number of reads that you're doing. So in this case, I have it squared up, and this line is in the center of this slot. This is locked in place. This is locked in place. So if I roll this up to its first point, I'm now ready to cut the first reed in this leg. Now, because I applied these pieces of plywood before I did my first leg, they automatically guarantee the proper orientation of all the legs when I mount them on this jig, so I don't have to do that squaring again for each leg. As long as I make sure that the face of the leg is aligned with this center line, it's going to position the reeds correctly. Now let's talk about the stops. These are just simple pieces of wood that have been clamped to the bed in a position that when the scratch stock is either in the fully left or fully right position, it stops the scratch stock housing from moving. This is, in general, a good idea so that as you're pulling or pushing the scratch stock, you don't go past the position you want to stop at. I normally set these so that I am stopping about a quarter of an inch or less short of where I want to stop. I'll have to clean up the rest by hand. So this one is set about an eighth of an inch before this stop point, and this one is set 3/16 above this stopping point. So this is set to go. Now, in this particular leg, this is a very delicate leg, and it gets turned down to 9/16 at some point. So this leg, if you lean on it, it flexes some. And while it's not a lot of force that goes on using the scratch stock, it's a reasonable amount. So I also use this. It's a simple So this leg has a fair amount of flex in it because it is turned down at this point to 9/16 of an inch. So if you lean against it, you can see it move. Now, I've been able to cut reeds on these legs without putting a stop on the back, but I just feel more comfortable arresting any movement at all while I'm doing the scratching. So I use a simple stop. It's just a V cut, a piece of MDF. It rests against some part of the leg above where I'm reading and gets clamped down to the bed. This bed is a simple piece of melamine. I use melamine because it's slick in terms of not arresting the movement due to friction. And I also put paraffin on the bottom of the scratch stock housing to allow it to move a little, move freely. So that's about it. The next step is to actually cut a stock scratch. So at this point the leg is mounted, it's properly oriented, the indexing stop is in place, the stops for the scratch stock housing is in place, the steady arm is in place. You probably won't need that unless you're turning a very delicate leg like this, and now it's time to start actually cutting the reeds. Now you'll find that the scratch stock works best in one direction versus the other. What that direction is changes from leg to leg, and in fact changes from reed to reed. So the first step is to put it against one of the stops and gently score going down the leg until it hits a stop. This is all you're trying to do is to initiate the scratch cutting. Now, in using this, we want to keep this back part from rolling this way. So you want to keep your hand down on that rest, and this hand out on the end of this so that you get the most leverage. And the idea is to keep the scratch stock from rolling or flipping. You don't want it to flip up like that or roll over like that or go past the proper stop points. So as you go, I find it easier to pull rather than push, and I'm noticing from this leg that it is cutting much better when I'm pushing it. However, if I go over there, you won't be able to see what I'm doing. But there is a big difference. So I'm going to switch the camera over to this side so you can see me finishing this reed. So you can see I have the first track started. This reading scratch stock can get clogged, so every now and then you want to take it off and blow it clear or pick it out with some type of tool. But yeah, that's cutting much better. You can see these shavings coming off. It's not dust, it's It's full shavings. This is just about done. Now at either end, it's very hard to get it to start definitively, so you have kind of a ramp in and a ramp out. This is just about stopped cutting. Okay, it's done. So that's the first reed. You can see that it is rounded over a little bit, but when you look at the final leg, the rounding, well, it'll have to be brought down to its end point manually with a chisel over here and a chisel over there, and rounded with probably a back bend or something like that. So now we simply roll the indexing wheel to the next index point, lock it in place, and start again. Now, one of the benefits of going at this from the side is you have a lot of visibility as to what you're doing. Also, you can pretty much follow any contour. Now this happens to be a straight reeded leg, but if this had a bow in it and changed in shape cylindrically from top to bottom, the scratch stock would follow that shape without any difficulty at all. So this is done. This is clogging a little bit, so you just make sure it's, yeah, it's not cutting anymore. So that reed is done. Go to the next index point. So you can see once everything is set up, this is a pretty quick process. It's predictable, it's reliable, it's customizable, and everything in this setup, except the lathe, is made up of junk that I had laying around the workshop. So let's take a look. I just do that 7 more times, and it'll be finished.
This is what the reading channels look like when you're finished scratching them. This is what they're going to look like whether you do it with a router bit or with a scratch stock. As you can see, a considerable amount of hand work is required to finish the channels at the top and the bottom and to round over all the reeds. This is also accomplished with a scratch stock, but a different one. This is what the channel cutting scratch stock looks like when it's in the holder. It should be ground with a radius that you think is suitable for the reeds you are cutting. It should protrude as far as the deepest part of the reed channel you're trying to cut. The bottom part of the rounding should sit just below the holder so that when the holder hits the leg, the scratch stock will stop cutting. This provides consistency along the length of the cut.
So after completing the work with the scratch stock to get the initial reeds laid down, there's a fair amount of handwork that is required at the top of the reed and at the bottom of the reed to clean it up and to round over at a progressively changing radius the entire reed from the bottom to the top. Now this is done with chisels, scratch stock, if you like sandpaper. Now to do this, I use a little jig here to hold the leg. This is a very simple jig. I don't like to have lots of extra things around the shop that I don't have room for, so I like things that I can take apart and use my existing bench and put in a drawer. So this jig is simply two stand-up blocks with a screw. I made this one first, this one second, put the screw in here, pushed the two of them together to mark where the center point was on this side, drilled it out, so I have a center point here, a center point there, and the way, so you slide it up against the dog, and just clamp it to the bench. The clamp just keeps this from rolling over that way when you put pressure on it. You put a dog in this side, slide that up against it, clamp this side down. And you feel for the center holes that were there from the lathe, and you just use your tailstock to tighten this up. And as you're doing it, you just loosen this, rotate it, close it up. The sandpaper on both sides to give it a little bit of friction, so it's locked in place, it's not going anywhere. And this provides you with a working surface to do the reading fairly simply. Nice close-up view. Now to do this, I have a scratch stock that has been ground to a bevel and a point. And to do the initial work, I hold it simply in my hand. There's no special holder for it. So this will allow you to put an arc, changing arc from the bottom to the top simply by rolling this left or right. The only thing you have to be careful of is you want to keep the center point right in the center of the reed, and as you roll it, it's important to keep it there or you'll wind up digging into the side of the reed beside it. So it's a simple matter of very light touch, and this starts to roll over the reeds from bottom to top. But the first step, and what I do is I do all of the work on the top of the leg, on all of the legs, and then I turn it over and do the bottom, because there's a certain pace and meter to getting it done, and it's easier just to do them all at once. So I use a V-tool to push this to the top, being very careful not to go too far, and that extends that reed that I had at the bottom. Loosen this, roll this a little bit, do the other side of the reed. Then take my scratch stock and just extend this. Like with the lathe, you'll find that it cuts better in one direction than another. So that rolls that over very nicely on that side, and then I get this one. And now a chisel to roll up one of the corners here. So you can see right here that this is as far as the scratch stock got on the lathe, and this needs to be extended to this stop up here. If you look at these, this is what you want them to look like when they're done. There'll be a little more cleanup in there, but that's all the rough chisel work. So we'll start working on this one, and we need to, let's start with this one because that one's completely fresh. So the first step is to extend this channel all the way to the top, then to round it over with the scratch stock, and then with the chisel create this curved ending. Okay, so we'll just do that. First thing we'll do is put the channel on the top. We're working on this one. We use a V-tool. We're working on this one here. We use a V-tool to extend it. Okay. Now we use the scratch stock. So that's this curved surface. Now it's the way I've done this, it's a little less, there's a softer curve on this side than this side, so depending on whether I'm down at the bottom or at the top or which way I roll it, I can get a different radius. So with this, I just drop it into the channel and lean it over just ever so slightly, and this starts to round this edge. So you can see I'm rolling it over. This is tearing out going in that direction, so I'm going to come back this way. Now I'm rolling it over and getting this side of the reed. Okay. So this is a number 3/8, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this edge off here. I'm going to kind of roll it so that I create part of an arc there. Right, like so. Almost like chip carving. And I roll this one over. And you can see I almost have that arc there. Now I could leave it like that, that's one look, but I like to roll it over again from the top, and this one just seems to fit. So I'll just take this and lift it as I go up, the way you would do a bead. When you do that, you have to go back in on the corners again, often. And that's just about it. Now I'll come back when I do all of those. I'll come back with a where is it? This kind of tool, and I'll just go in here like so and clear out that upper corner on all of them. I'll get this side, but it's easier to do this once after you get everything done, because as you're doing each of these, if you do them one at a time, you're always going to have to go back again, because as you do the next one, it leaves more debris in there. So we'll just take this one now, roll this edge over, roll this edge over, And roll it from the top. And that's real time. I find it's better to get it close to right on all of them and then go around one more time and do the final cleanups. So here we go. I'm going to do this one now. I have this side is already got a V on it from when I did this reed. So I just have to get the V tool, being very gentle with this. You really don't want to push that through the top. Okay. We get the scratch stock working. Now this one's working fine in this direction, unlike the reed right next to it where it didn't. Go figure. Now if I wanted to, I could take the scratch stock that was in the original, the one I used on the lathe, and use it for this. I just like a wider base to hold on to. Okay, and we'll come back and do a cleanup on that. Now I can go further down this leg, I probably should, to get a nice progressive curve. Although the scratch stock coming off the lathe did a reasonable job. In this particular one, it looks like this side is a little more square than that side, so I need to roll this one over a little bit more, just on this side. Cutting in this direction much better. That's better. Okay. Next. So I'm rolling this over to my right to get a nice arc on the right side, and then I'm rolling it over on the left, and I'm paying attention to keep this point right centered, and I'm using my eye and my fingers to make sure it stays where it needs to be. You don't want that point to drift over to the adjacent reed and score the side of it. That one's going to need a fair amount of cleanup. Now the reason I do all the tops at the same time is, as you can see, there's a certain number of cuts and approach you want to take. And if you keep switching between the top and the bottom, you're kind of getting out of cadence. So while there is a desire to see one of these reeds completed top to bottom, better off, and it's much more efficient to finish one task before you move on to the next one. In fact, one could argue, and I often do, I do the V-tool, I do this and roll it over, and then I do all of the carving at the same time. For example, I would take this over. Okay, so those are all done. Now I can go back and start to round over these edges. So you can see this goes a little faster when you do the tasks that are common. So this is basically taking off the corners and then rolling the top. And it is really much better to do all those at once. You really keep the feel. So now I just come in here, kind of like chip carving, follow that corner and that corner, and then come down. In fact, I could probably use a chip carving knife for this. I'll have to try that. I am going to try a chip carving knife. It is easier. Yeah, a chip carving knife lets you get right into that V. Nice and small. Okay, some more cleanup to do, but for the most part, that's what doing the top looks like. Some more crud up here that needs to go away. Alright, so that's what we're looking to accomplish on the top. This one needs to be cleaned up a little more. Now we'll move on to the bottom. Alright, so now we're ready to do the bottom. As you can see, there's, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch or strong 1/4 of an inch to make up down here. And the process is basically the same. Use a V-tool to extend the reed to the bottom. And if you don't have a V-tool, you could use a regular chisel. Which is somewhere. Oh, here it is. You just put it in the slot, extend that a little bit, and then do your own V-tool. This is actually safer than the V-tool because it's very unlikely you're going to slip with this. Send the tool into the lower part here. You can see that this is quite rounded from the initial scratch stock, and down here it's pretty flat. So when we use the scratch stock down here, we're going to have to cause that to become rounded and fit smoothly into the end there. I went all the way around using the V-tool and then just terminating each section with this chip carving knife. You could use a chisel, you could use a pocket knife, doesn't matter. You just want to bring it to a square end down there. So you can see that I haven't rounded these. This one's definitely flat at the top. Okay, so now we're going to use the scratch stock to get the rounding done. So we'll just lock this in place. Roll it a bit. Roll it to the left. Gets clogged up down here. So you can see this is rounded here. It's got a little crud in there. I got to round this side a little bit more. And I just work my way around. I don't try to get it completely perfect. So I'm doing the left side of this now. What you're trying to do is to get a line that seems to work from up here down into the bottom. Don't try to get it completely perfect in the first pass. And I'll go around again with a chisel and maybe a different scratch stock depending on what it looks like. But things, as you start to work your way around, it starts to look more and more like it's supposed to. And you want to be sighting down these valleys here to make sure they're straight. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It's not particularly hard to do, it just requires attention to detail, light touch. There's the last flat one here. And this scratch stock will probably have to be tuned up pretty soon. And that just means taking the file and lightly refreshing the shape. And that'll give it a nice square edge. What you want to do is make sure that when you go across this file, you're perpendicular to both sides. You can put this on a stone, and just the whole point of this is to have a very crisp, sharp corner. Some people, you can use a very hard piece of steel to roll this edge like you would with a scraper, but I think you get more control if you just leave it square. So if you look, that's what the bottom of one of these is supposed to look like. Right like that, where it goes directly into the bottom. And it's just take your time. Sometimes if you just take it to a point where you think it's like 95% and walk away, go have lunch and come back, it looks pretty different when you come back and you can see things that you stopped being able to see when you were staring at it for so long. And that's pretty much how to take the roughly reeded leg and finish the tops and the bottoms. Now, I hear a lot of people, fellow woodworkers who really like power tools, think that I like power tools. Don't get me wrong, I like to use them when it's appropriate, but they think that using a router is definitely the way to go here, and the only part of this that the router can substitute for is the part over on that I use the lathe for, with initially laying out these tracks for the reeds. You still have to roll them over by hand. You still have to terminate both sides by hand. So if you think there's a real benefit to using a router, by all means use it. I've done it both ways, and I don't think there's pretty much any contest. The running the scratches by hand with a scratch stock,
is superior, in my opinion, to a router. You get a better shape. These are pretty much almost rounded. I'm going to take the scratch stock and go all the way up and down the leg as soon as I finish this. And you won't get that far with a router unless you're fortunate enough to be able to buy a router bit that exactly matches some part of this leg, but wherever it matches, say it matches here, it's definitely not going to match up here, and it's definitely not going to match down there. So you have to work out some very careful mechanism to lift the router as it's cutting down here, or else the track will be too deep, and you will not get, you'll not be able to clean up these edges. So I don't think a scratch stock is a better option because in throwback, I think it's a better option because it is in fact simply a better option. Okay. Now I start to look up and down these legs and try to get these nice and uniform from top to bottom. I flip the scratch stock and go with the other side, and that pretty much guarantees that both sides of this are looking the same. So we're getting there. There's some cleanup on the top that is required. So there's cleanup up here. It's very close, but it's not ready for prime time yet. There's some cleanup and rounding, uniform rounding that needs to take place on this leg, but for the most part, it definitely would pass the 6-foot test. We're not at the 6-inch test yet level. And that's it.